This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Thank you to Campaign Sidekick for supporting the podcast. Visit campaignsidekick.vote to find out how our best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. This week, we're talking with my state senator and longtime friend, Konni Burton. Konni will tell you that the most important facts of her bio are that she's foremost a wife, a mom, and a lifelong Christian. Next to those facts is the fact that she is a native Texan. She and her husband, Phil, have been married for 32 years and have two incredible daughters, Tori and Faith. We'll cover her political background in depth during our talk, so I don't want to give too much away now. But Konni's journey from grassroots activist to state senator is a case study in how we need more citizen leaders to grow. Konni is widely regarded as one of the most conservative members of the Texas State Senate and has been awarded a number of legislative awards from both fiscal and socially conservative organizations. I'm proud to count Konni among the alumni of my training programs, and I've loved getting to know her and work with her over the last 8 years of our friendship. Senator, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on, and congratulations on a wonderful venture you have here.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to have you on the podcast. You're the second elected legislator that we have on. They followed Matt Krause, our mutual friend, up. And
Wait a minute.
I know.
We had Representative Krause on before you had me on.
We did. That's a personal failure on my part that you guys can argue about.
No, Krause is awesome. Love him. He's terrific.
No, you guys are fantastic, and I love working with both of you guys. You know, what I kind of want to start out with is start us out talking about what happened before the Tea Party for you, how your political philosophy and your background developed before things kind of hit critical mass in 2009.
Right. So I have been a lifelong Republican, always voted Republican. I always want to make sure that people understand that. So I've been a conservative all my life, voted Republican. But, you know, particularly as a conservative, I think what we do is we vote for those that we want to get government limited, and then we go on our merry lives, right? A lot of people do that, but I think particularly conservatives in the past have, because we expect those that we vote for to get into office and do what they say they're going to do. And I have to say, I just assumed, unfortunately, that that's what they were doing. And, went to school, got married, got a job, then had children, then stayed at home and was thinking everything was good. And all of a sudden, it was during really George W.'s second term that just really woke me up to the fact that, wait just a dadgum minute, what are we doing? And of course, it's the national level that I think most people pay most attention to. And I was no different in that regard. And, we were doing ridiculous things like bailing out private industry, expanding government, spending way too much money. I mean, everything that I thought Republicans stood for, we were doing the total opposite. So it was really then that I began to get very frustrated, and kind of got me paying more attention to politics. I certainly paid attention to politics, but it was very much on a surface level, and it was very much what I heard from the mainstream media as well.
So what triggered your involvement with helping grow the Tea Party in North Texas? So you woke up kind of during the latter part of the George Bush's second term and realized that these Republicans weren't actually doing what they said they were going to do when they were getting elected. And so something got you involved in the Tea Party, helping grow that here in North Texas.
Right. So it's kind of interesting, as I said, I woke up. But what was so interesting is that a lot of the rest of the country were doing the same thing. And it was kind of also somewhat the beginnings of the social media sphere as well. I mean, I'm talking about, like, say, the average person getting on social media. It was a totally organic movement of just average, everyday people being aggravated that our federal government was getting out of control. So So, I did a lot of it via social media for a long time, kind of, got my feet wet that way, and then heard about a local tea party which was happening all over the country at the time. People were just kind of gathering together, much of the time over at their dining room tables with friends that were feeling just as frustrated. And there was a local tea party that was basically, it was very tiny. A few, had a meeting once a month. A few people would come, and I decided to go to one of those meetings. I also had already been to a couple of the protests. And now let me give you a little bit of a heads up, because now we're talking about the beginning of Obama's presidency. I mentioned that I got involved in George W.'s second term, but we all really went into overdrive when Obama got elected, because his big government ways went into overdrive, right? So
Right.
now we're kind of into the early Obama days. And, that's when, of course, the Obamacare travesty began. So basically, it was very much a time of educating myself on why we were where we were in the country and how we can get ourselves in a better position for limited government, personal liberty, government, basically, is where I was at that point in time.
Yeah, so you were doing what a lot of folks were at that point, which is you wanted to educate yourself on how the problems originated and really what we could do about them as citizens, and then
Right.
trying to get out there and try to influence that. And that that really evolved from that education and early activation side to now we're talking about Obamacare gets passed in 2010, and then we're looking at beyond that. And we're really, we start taking back the House in 10, and we're going on until 2012 when you met a good friend of mine and yours now, Senator Cruz, when he was early on, before he was even running for the Senate seat. Talk to me a little bit, because you became one of the lead organizers for his Senate campaign and were a huge factor in his election here in Texas. Kind of talk me through some of that history and how that evolved.
Right. So, so we got, like I mentioned, you have to, quickly realize that you can't make change at the federal level very easily. However, we had a great opportunity here in Texas that we had an open Senate seat, which doesn't happen very often. And there was, Dewhurst was kind of the, as people were calling the next one. In other words, it was his turn to take
Right.
that.
Well, he had the money. He was a sitting lieutenant governor. He had a lot of establishment support. He could personally write tens of millions of dollars of checks into the account. So he was the prohibitive favorite.
That's exactly right. You said it much better than I. Exactly. Well, those of us that were, on the ground, just average everyday citizens, were very frustrated with with him at the lieutenant governor level. So, we did not want him to just go on to get the Senate seat. And so, there was a lot of people who jumped into that race. And I made darn sure that I spoke to each and every one of them, went around to the different events that they were at and they spoke at, and listened to them. And very early on, well, and in addition to those events, I also got invited to kind of a closed door meeting with some local activists, and was able to speak to Ted Cruz and listen to him personally, one-on-one, of his principles. And, hands down, he was the best candidate. He spoke and said exactly the things that I believed in. And so I quickly got behind him. But as you know, and everybody knows, it's very hard to go up against somebody that's kind of presumed the next U.S. senator. And so he knew, fortunately, and all the people around Ted Cruz that was helping him understood that this had to be a grassroots movement in order for him to beat somebody like a David Dewhurst. And so that's where many of us came in and began to help Ted in that race.
Well, and as that evolved, you became one of his top one of his top activist leaders that was helping him. And so I imagine during that process, you started learning a whole lot more about how campaigns work, what running for office really takes, and what it takes to be an effective leader.
Absolutely. I've been asked this question before, and it dawned on me, I think the very first time somebody asked me that, I had no idea when I began to help others get elected and worked with their campaign, how invaluable that alone was when I ran for office. I by no means got involved to help others get elected because I planned on running for office. It was nowhere in my mind at the time. You certainly think of how you would do things if you were in office, right? Or if you ran for office, but it was never, I'm going to do this ever. And so, I'd gotten involved in some House races in our area as well. And it's amazing to me how much that helped me know how to run a campaign once I did run for Senate. And it always amazed me when particularly in my Senate race, when I watched others who I was running against, I could tell they didn't really have a clue. And I don't mean that to be disparaging at all. It just means they didn't have that knowledge that I didn't even realize I had until I ran and saw how others didn't have it, if that makes sense.
No, yeah. I mean, it was very clear, that you learned a great deal from being so up close and personal with these campaigns, because from the state house level to obviously U.S. Senator, you learned a lot, both about, your public speaking and how to, work with people and get votes through building those relationships, as well as you had worked through and seen so many of these campaigns, the ones that won and ones that lost, and got to observe them and be part of them up close. That's of incalculable value. And it gave you a whole graduate level in electoral politics that your opponents didn't have. It was kind of an unfair playing field from the beginning, because we had in your race, when you ended up running, you were up against a former state rep that had been out for a while and hadn't had serious campaigns since he first ran, 6 or 8 years before, and nobody else that had seriously contested races before. And so while you hadn't run a personally contested race, you had been heavily involved in many that had been quite heated and very difficult. So, at what point did you kind of move from the helping other people to start thinking, man, maybe I should run?
Right. Well, and it wasn't so much, maybe I should run as much as I was so aggravated that my state senator was Wendy Davis, right? So that had been a frustration for me for quite some time, getting involved. It's like, why? Tarrant County, that is a very conservative county and area, why do we have somebody like Wendy Davis as our state senator? Now, I knew what she was like down in Austin, but as most of us, again, kind of go on our merry way, we don't pay attention to specifically how they vote down in Austin, right? But
quick as a recap for the listeners, Wendy Davis was the lone state senator Democrat from Tarrant County, which is one of the reddest counties in the state as far as one of the last urban red counties, and she was the lead proponent back in the 2012 legislative cycle or 13 legislative cycle, trying to oppose some of the pro-life legislation that the state house and the state senate were trying to push through. Some landmark legislation that did a lot to save a lot of babies. And Konni, that especially hit close to home with your background as a pro-life activist and working with pro-adoption groups and adopting your own girls. And from that point, Wendy decided to run for governor, trying to leverage her fame from her, filibuster, trying to stop this pro-life legislation. And we had all of a sudden what was to be a vacant Senate seat and the opportunity to take that back from a very liberal pro-abortion senator and put it in the hands of somebody that could actually be a strong conservative.
That's right. And I will just correct a little bit of that and say that I did get in the race. I did not wait to get in the race.
That's correct.
Open seat. So I got in the race while she was still planning on running again for this Senate seat. As a matter of fact, it was still during session And it was before I got into the race, before she even did that filibuster, which was a great benefit to me, right? So I
forgot you got in that early.
Oh yes, absolutely, and it's a big part of what helped me so much. I was already on social media as an activist. Then I got into the race, probably mid-March during that session. Of course, it was like, May, beginning of June that she did the filibuster. And I was already, actively in the race, and then got on social media big time during the filibuster, which got my name out everywhere, not only in the district, not only in Texas, but across the country, because that's how big of a deal that filibuster was, and how horrible that filibuster was, frankly, right? It helped me. So I was in the race already, and then she jumped out to run for governor, and then I got 4 other opponents in the primary.
Right.
But again, that just goes to show, we knew we had to get in early. Regardless, of course, we didn't know about the filibuster. We didn't know any of that stuff was going to happen. But when you're going to run against somebody that's got the kind of name ID that Wendy Davis did in the district, at the time it wasn't so much in the state, but certainly in the district. And I learned that lesson from, again, being with the Ted Cruz campaign against David Dewhurst. I mean, who'd have thought, right? I would not have known that, but I certainly understood that wisdom, because they, I think it was 2 years he ran for that office. Yeah. And you had to, because you've got to get all over Texas, right? And so I understood how that grassroots part of the campaign worked, because I had been a part of the Ted Cruz. So, even though Senate District 10 is obviously much smaller than the state of Texas, it's no different. You've still got to get out there and work. So we were in the race for 18 months before the actual general election. By the time the general election came, we had been in the race for 18 months. And it's just, when you're in a race like that, you need every single solitary minute of that.
Well, one of the things that our buddy Aaron Harris pointed out to me was that Wendy Davis is actually probably the one we have most to thank for getting Senator Cruz into office, because as a result of her lawsuits trying to push back all the redistricting reforms here in Texas and the voter ID stuff, we ended up having our primary pushed back 2 months. And despite the fact that he had been up for over a year and a half at that point running for the Senate seat, he needed every single day possible to build that name ID and build trust with voters. And he leveraged that and was able to then go and get in the runoff and beat Dewhurst. You had a similar strategy, getting in a year out from the primary and working your butt off. I mean, it was very impressive, because you guys knocked on so many doors. You had such a strong ground game from early on that, that's something we always talk about as a critical component of winning your race. Talk me through kind of how that race evolved from early on, and kind of especially the ground game side, but how you guys grew and what got you to win.
Right. So first, people, I think consultants get a bad rap. And there's plenty of consultants out there that should get a bad rap. But first and foremost, I, talked to consultants, like-minded consultants that believe in conservatism, right? They believe in that. They're not looking, of course, everybody's got to make a living, and I don't begrudge anybody that at all. But you also want to know why they're doing what they're doing. And so first and foremost, you get a good consultant that's in it for the reasons that you're in the race. And for me, that was because I'm a principled person. I want to change things for the better of everybody based on conservative principles. So you get a good campaign consultant, and then you get a good campaign manager. And I had the best of the best, and she was. I had the best of the best consultant, the best of the best campaign manager.
Yeah, you did good.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my campaign manager particularly, while the consultant is the big picture type person, the campaign manager is on the ground, detailed, oriented, can get things done, hire people, fire people, those kinds of things, all the little details that you don't need to be bothered with when you're running crazy every day, going to as many events a day that you can. So, you start with those two. And then you make sure that campaign manager is detail oriented and that you're not, frankly. I think anyway, I used to think I was a detailed person, and I think I was in my past life in different areas, but it's really behooved me in politics that I'm not. I'm very much a big picture, principled person, and I let the others do the detail work that needs to be done. Now, I'm sure it works differently, right? I'm sure there's some people that run for office that are detailed, and I think that's probably a good thing for them. As long as you know what your attributes are and you fill in, for the things that you need, that's what you need to do. And fortunately, we had that. And so, I let them take care of the campaign manager and the campaign consultant take care of where we needed to be, where we needed the walkers to be. They did all the numbers, the strategy, that kind of thing. I had an excellent treasurer who is my husband.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And at first I felt kind of bad about that. I was like, my husband? Because people always say, oh, you need this name or this, that kind of a thing. And, my consultant said, you don't need, that's not necessarily, you just need somebody to be your treasurer. And my husband is very, very, very detailed in the numbers and that kind of way. And so, again, I was able to let him handle that. Still do, as a matter of fact. Probably would be more hands-on if he wasn't my husband. But because you always want to make sure that's on the, up and up. But anyway, so I've got all these great people that are taking care of the details and telling me where I need to be and, what I need to be doing and those kinds of things. And, what you said too, the secret is, and among all those other things that I just said, is hard work, right? It just, nothing. Everything comes down to hard work, right? In any job, anywhere, anytime. If you work hard, you're going to get the job done.
Now, tell me a little bit more about as far as the campaign manager and the consultant. What was it in? It was Luke Macias, that was your consultant, and Kathy Scott was your campaign manager.
Yep.
Talk a little bit more about what your process was in identifying them and hiring them, what some of their attributes were, and what it was that helped you build such great trust in them to be able to delegate that stuff so you could focus on talking to voters and donors.
Right. So, I did talk to Sarah, and there's another consultant that I would have loved to have had as well, but he was very, very busy on a much bigger campaign. And I talked to him a lot as well. But, mainly I needed somebody that could be with me as much as I needed them to be with me, right? Because this was my first campaign. And I needed a consultant that I knew would be all in with me. And Luke had that ability to do that. Now, to say all that, you have arguments with your consultant, with your campaign manager.
Oh, of course.
Right. You have differences of opinion. Sometimes, I would change a decision, rarely, really, but sometimes I would, because sometimes, those people, particularly consultant, even though Luke is very much a grassroots type of person, he's not on the ground here in Tarrant County, right? Yeah. He's not, the person that hears what's being said every day. So from that regard, never be afraid to say, hey, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I think. And use your knowledge that you have to help your consultant as well. But mainly my goal with both of them is that, we were like-minded. I hire people that very much believe in the same things I do. So there's never any question. We always come to the same conclusion, perhaps, on how we should do things. And so that's my main concern, is that we believe in the same political philosophies, the same values, principles, conservative principles. I mean, on down the line, I'll ask people, okay, where do you stand on, of course you ask things like, where do you stand on life? Where do you stand on, but I'll get very specific as, where do you stand on, government helping private businesses? I'll ask them very specific because I want us to be very like-minded. And that's the most important thing to me, and always is when I'm hiring people for my campaign, and frankly, in office as well.
Well, and that's something that I think so many more elected officials should take to heart, because when you're in those positions, especially once you get into a legislative office, the people that are your staff in large part are the ones that are helping you filter information and gather what is going to help you make your final decisions and figure out where your votes are going to go. And if you're having to argue on first principles with these people, and that's where the disagreements come down, then you're not being served well, and your constituents aren't being served well. And so as a result, if you have those first principles nailed down, then when you have a disagreement, whether you're with your consultant or with a staffer, you know that you come from a common place of values, and that your disagreements are not over fundamental principles, but they're over tactics and perhaps some strategy about how to best pursue those principles and advance them. And so that's a much better place to be arguing from, and that's where honest people can have honest disagreements, and you're the boss, so you make the final call.
Exactly. And listen, you've got people, you're only one person. So you've got a lot of people talking for you, right? And so I need the people who are that I have hired to be able to articulate where I stand on the issues, so that when they're telling other people who are going to go out and help me, right, and knock doors and that kind of thing, they can also articulate my position. So the last thing you want is for your positions not to be articulated correctly. And when you've got people around you that are, simpatico with you, I don't worry about that. I they can do it. And so, yeah, it's definitely the way to go.
So tell me a little bit more about the ground game side, because I know you guys knocked an astronomical number of doors, both during the primary, runoff, and then on to the general election, because you were contested at all three phases. Walk me through how you guys developed that and some of the things that you learned about the grassroots ground game during that process.
Right. So, and two, you're going to need to have, I'd love for you to have Kathy on sometime, if you can, because she just is the genius, her and Luke together, but really Kathy, the genius in figuring where we need to be, in the district, right? So I live in a roughly 50-50 Senate district, which means it could conceivably go Democrat or Republican. Now, it doesn't really change how you target. I mean, regardless, even if you're in a very highly Republican district or highly Democrat, you're still going to want to talk to the people, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, first, right? So you go around letting those voters who are who have been let's say voted in the primary for the last four, voted in the last four, say, Republican primaries, you want to touch them first, right? Because those are the people that are going to be coming back. They're going to be voting in the primary. They're very likely very strong conservatives in the Republican Party, right? So you want to reach those people first and foremost. These are the people that are active, that are voting in the primaries, that have a voice, that will help other people to know who they need to vote for in the primary. So first and foremost, we of course go to them, and then you move out from there. And you go to the next level. And then of course you've got, when you're looking at your map of the district, you're looking at those areas which are strong, or I should say, so you've got the low-hanging fruit, and then you've got the areas where you've got people that are voting, say, in the generals, they're voting Republican, they're not necessarily primary voters, and so you're going to them and speaking to them. So in other words, it's a concentric circle kind of thing, I guess I should say. I don't know if that helps to explain it, but right? So it's a concentric circle kind of thing. So you reach the low-hanging fruit first, and then you move in and move in and move in. And the more time you have, the more that you can actually start going to people that they don't really know, right? Those are the hardest of all. But those are definitely worth knocking on the doors of, because there is nothing better than one-on-one contact with the voter. And I will tell you, I was always amazed when I did it just as an activist for others running. I was absolutely and utterly surprised how many times I got thanked for knocking on somebody's door and giving them information about the people that were running for election. So not only is it good for the candidate, obviously, the candidate is the best, but people still are very happy to have somebody knock on their door and give them information about the candidate, where they stand on issues and who they are and that kind of thing. And they remember that and they love that. And they will go to the ballot box saying, you know what, that person came and knocked on my door. Maybe Konni Burton couldn't come, but a surrogate for Konni Burton come, and it was somebody that I spoke to one-on-one that believes in what she stands for and was willing to come to my door, knock on it, and tell me about her, and they get my vote. So there's just nothing more important than one-on-one contact with the voter.
Well, and that goes back to why you guys started so early, because in a lot of cases, if you have a campaign that starts 6 months out for the primary, there's just a lot of structural limits on how many doors you can knock on and how many voters you can have those conversations with. But you guys didn't just launch a year out from the primary and just sit there for 6 months. You guys started knocking doors nearly immediately, and do you remember how many doors you guys knocked total?
I knew you were going to, and I should have asked this. My consultant knows the number left and right, and I'm just one of those where the numbers just kind of, it's a terrible attribute for me. It's terrible. Every candidate knows their numbers, and for some reason that's just something I don't keep that in my head. But so we'll have to ask Luke how many we knocked on. It was an astronomical amount.
Yeah, I think it was a couple 100,000 by all this total. I feel like 220,000 was sticks in my head, because actually, I was part of that effort. So I should remember that as well. But I believe it was nearly 250,000 doors through the two phases of that. I mean, you guys were out there knocking doors time and again and built a very, very strong, both your database of knowing where, what voters believed in, what they cared about, and being able to just recontact them and build those relationships. And it was huge, because, I mean, in your case, you were up against, 4 other people in the primary, and they were up against had to go to the runoff, which is, takes more time and is more expensive. And then you had, to go on to the general and fight a contested general, because folks, don't know a whole lot about this district, but it's kind of a weird district as far as voting patterns, because this is a district it's one of the few competitive state house districts in Texas, or state senate districts, which means that astronomical amounts of money get dumped into it during contested elections. And on top of that, we have a history in this district of breaking the ballot. So which means that like in 2012, Mitt Romney won on the Republican side. Then Wendy Davis won as a Democrat. And then across the board, in most of these areas, the Republican running for state house won as well. So they were zigzagging on the ballot, which as somebody that works, does a lot of this number crunching, that doesn't happen. It's a very weird thing.
And let me tell you, I don't know if this is something that you want, others to, if this is something that's concerning to others, but I will tell you, I do think this is important for people to hear, you talking about that. So one of my competitors, you had mentioned earlier, was a former House rep, but hadn't run a race in a while. But frankly, that's not quite right.
Yeah, he ran against Wendy Davis and lost badly.
Right. That's right. So he had very big name ID because he had run a Senate race against Wendy Davis just 2 years prior. Because remember, we had redistricting and Wendy Davis came back and drew the 2-year straw. So she had to run again right away in 2 years. So it was only 2 years later, after the Republican candidate had lost badly to her. So the reason, get back to what you were saying, that I think that there was this zigzag is because, and Ted said this a lot, and I firmly believe it, our Republican candidate who was running against Wendy Davis was a moderate Republican. And, the prevailing wisdom is In a district such as this, that is a 50-50 district, you've got to move to the middle to win it, right? That's what everybody would say. You got to be a moderate to win it. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. That race right there, not to mention Ted Cruz's race against David Dewhurst right there, are two shining examples of why running a middle of the road campaign doesn't win. So like Ted did, he ran an unabashed conservative race against David Dewhurst and won. I did the same in my race. And won, even though again it's not one of the races, one of the seats that's could be taken. It is the only one that could go Republican or Democrat. So again, people were like, oh, you got to run in the middle. No. First of all, I'm not in the middle. I'm a very conservative.
To put it mildly.
With me. But nonetheless, we ran a very unabashed conservative campaign and won, right? So that's something else for everybody else to understand. I don't know why people think, how can you moderate? To me, you don't really have principles, right? You're just kind of go whichever the way the wind blows. And I don't know how you run on that, frankly. And it's not appealing to voters either. And our race definitely showed that.
You absolutely did. Well, Senator, I know that you've got to run. You've got a meeting you got to get to. Do you have any last words of advice for folks that are looking to run for office?
Yeah. Do it. But also, I want people, if they are thinking about doing it, they need to do it. However, they also perhaps should step back if they haven't done anything political at all, and perhaps wait a bit, right? Don't just jump in if you haven't done anything else, because you're going to have a hard time winning, and you're not going to be as successful. My advice would be get involved with campaigns first. Again, I didn't do that because I wanted to run for office, but I realize now how invaluable that was. So get involved some way. Do grunt work. Don't get involved to, make a name for yourself. Get involved because it's the right thing to do, whether it's a local race or a statewide race or a national race. But get involved behind the scenes and do phone calls, phone banking, door knocking, putting out signs, all the things, the grunt work that you need to do it. And then take a look at whether you want to run, and if you still do it. And that knowledge alone will help you immensely in your race for whatever it is.
You could not be more right. And I think it's important to note as we close out that when Konni was working with these campaigns, she wasn't just a spokesperson that went out there and said speeches. Konni was somebody that you actually went out there, you were knocking doors, you were stuffing envelopes, putting out signs, doing grassroots grunt work. And that's part of why you understood what it took to win this race, a hard-fought one. And that's why I look forward to having you as my senator for a long time.
Terrific.
Senator, thank you so much. Best of luck down in Austin this session. God bless you. Thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to talking to you guys again next week. Adios.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.